Hello, my name's Brian Dillon, and I've been asked to talk a little bit about Roland Barthes, about my interest in his writing, or rather, I suppose, my love for his work. I first discovered Barthes' writing when I was a teenager, and I grew up reading music magazines of the mid-1980s, where Barthes' name would strangely appear alongside those of other French philosophers and intellectuals of the period. And eventually, having figured out that there was something interesting and obviously fashionable at that stage about Barthes' writing, I went to the local library and I found this book, Image, Music, Text, which is an English collection of mostly essays from the 1970s. And in a way, I found in this book something of what I thought I was looking for, which was an intellectual who was capable of stripping away the pretensions, the lies, the myths, as I learned to say from Barthes, of everyday life, of popular culture, of literature, of film. And I was tremendously excited. I thought that this was an incredibly radical way of looking at the world, understanding the world. And of course, it comes from Barthes' deep grounding at that point in the 1970s in structuralism and in semiotics. But I found something else, and I suppose it was partly to do with Barthes' style, which at that point in my teens I found difficult but also compelling, glamorous. But it was something also to do with an approach to a quality or a feeling almost a sentiment. And Barthes, in a way, is a kind of writer of sentiment in ways that I want to, I think, to talk about again in a moment. Something that escaped analysis, something that escaped critique. And I think of this, for example, in Barthes' analysis of the photograph at the top of this page, which is a still from Eisenstein's film, Ivan the Terrible. And in his essay, The Third Meaning, Barthes talks about this image as containing a kind of obvious meaning, symbolic meaning, but also something else, something that he calls its obtuse quality, that escapes and that is kind of found in the way that bodies appear on camera, that substance appears, things that don't quite make sense within the intended meaning of the film, or the critics or the intellectuals' overarching frameworks that he or she attaches to the object of analysis. So something else, some not exactly romantic or mysterious, but some quality that was left over, kind of remainder. And I still find this tremendously exciting in Barthes' work. Some of his books have been hugely influential to me as a critic, as an essayist, as a writer of memoir and autobiography. And those might be the more obvious ones, such as A Lover's Discourse or Camera Lucida. But a book actually that I think about a lot at the moment is Empire of Signs, first published in French in 1970, based on Barthes' travels in Japan in the late 1960s. And I've been trying to write about a particular sentence in this book, which seems to me to capture this quality in Barthes of an attention to substance, to things, to the materiality of the world. He's a writer who's often thought of, especially in his kind of academic reception, he's often thought of as dwelling in abstraction and signs and text. But here's Barthes paying attention to Japanese cuisine. The eel or the piece of vegetable, of shellfish, crystallized in grease, like the branch of Salzburg, is reduced to a tiny clump of emptiness, a collection of perforations. Here the foodstuff joins the dream of a paradox, that of a purely interstitial object, all the more provocative in that this emptiness is produced in order to provide nourishment. Occasionally, the foodstuff is constructed in a ball, like a wad of air. I particularly like that last phrase, a wad of air. Barthes' translator, Richard Howard, the American poet who translated a lot of his work, has kept in that sentence quite a lot of its structure, its syntax, its punctuation. But he's also maintained this quality of a kind of thinginess, of substance, And I've been thinking about this also in recent weeks while observing the lockdown, as many people, as almost everybody is right now, and thinking about the relationship between illness and the social and an idea of society. Something that Barthes turned to late in his career was a question, how to live together. He becomes exercised towards the end of his life in his lectures and last writings by this question of how simply, of course it's not so simple, how to live together. And I thought I would just give you a sentence from a text that I discovered very late, only in its recent-ish English translation. It's from 1947, when Barthes suffered, as many people will know, from tuberculosis as a young man, and he carried on having respiratory problems for all of his life. While at the sanatorium, a period in his life that he thinks about almost as a kind of utopian moment or utopian project, he was thinking about the kind of model of society that it proposed, this sense of being together, of forming a community, a creative community, and at the same time being subject to rules, to laws, to a kind of societal imposition. And I think that the opening paragraph of this essay, of this text, is a really interesting thing to read right now in our current situation. In a sanatorium society, everything conspires to return one to a situation defined and embellished with the attributes of an authentic society. The costs of this accumulation of artifice hardly matter, but first among them is considering as sufficient a society that is, alas, only parasitic. It is above all a matter of dissociating the consciousness of the ill person from the memory of not having been one. The junction of these two states would result in an intolerable strabismus. Hence the cheerful naturalization of the state of disease and the creation of a triumphant sanatorium society where the consciousness of exile no longer has a place. The malaise of not being social is exhausted through social exercises, recreated in the image of those from which one has just been excluded. The appearance of inner freedom is re-established within a new social conformism imitating the old one. A sanatorium code is postulated. What goes by the name of freedom, what goes by the name of responsibility, restrained by very real chains, is the very means of escape. We know that irresponsibility is never so fully achieved as it is in the innocent process of over-socialization. Thank you.